Hello, everyone, and welcome to theCUBE's coverage of Chainguard Assemble here in New York City, the Big Apple. I'm your host, Rebecca Knight, sitting alongside Paul Nashawaty, Principal Analyst at SiliconANGLE Media. We are joined by Dustin Kirkland, SVP of Engineering here at Chainguard. Welcome, Dustin.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful day, and we're talking tech. We're talking software factory.
Yes.
Which is the way that Chainguard describes itself, and it's a really interesting analogy. Obviously, we had Dan Lawrence up on the main stage, brought up a real power tool, but this manufacturing analogy, that the idea that software production is going through these same changes that physical manufacturing did too. How does that framing click for the executive leadership team at Chainguard? And as
such a powerful visual, right? So Dan had on stage a piece of wood, and he asked a volunteer to come up and use an old school hand saw to cut it. And it took a few minutes, and we all had a few laughs. And then big reveal, pulls out the power tool and just zip right across. And the point that he was making, which I think is very apropos to software developers, is we are entering the era of power tools for software development. And here we're talking, of course, AI, agentic development, and we got a lot to talk about with respect to that.
No, it's exciting times. I mean, the market is shifting, there's things happening. I like to say that 2025 was the year of experimentation, 26 is the year of implementation.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I agree what Dan was talking about in the keynote. I agree with the software factory approach. Automation is key. Definitely an area that I think a lot of companies aspire to get to, right? They want to get there. But I would ask from the perspective of maturity, right?
Yeah.
Because there's obviously there's a competitive advantage. You have to put this in the automation. You have to make sure things are working right. We see AI creating a lot of production code.
Sure.
But from a software factory perspective, how is the adoption going? I mean, we see your customer base growing substantially.
Right.
That's great. Year over year, from 150 customers to over just under 500.
Almost 500.
Yeah. That's amazing. So congrats on that.
Yeah.
But I think that from a maturity perspective on the software factory piece, they want to get there. How many of your customers are fully mature to take advantage of that?
Yeah, we see the full range in the spectrum, but with the product announcements that we made today, we're really helping many of those customers dramatically accelerate those timelines. So Chainguard's product started with our hardened container images, which really helped a lot of those customers professionalize their usage of Google Kubernetes engine and Amazon's Elastic Kubernetes service, AKS, EKS, GKE, or their own Kubernetes by publishing secure hardened images that allowed those customers to meet their compliance requirements, address regulatory issues, and just eliminate software vulnerabilities. Last year, we took it from there to a Chainguard Libraries announcement, and here today we announced millions of Chainguard-built library artifacts across the Python, Java, and JavaScript ecosystem, which helps those developers who aren't operating at the containers and Kubernetes level, but instead they're writing software and pip installing Python packages, or Maven adding Java packages, or NPM installing Node packages, but to do so safely from a secure repository. Now that's just the starting point, Paul. From there, we get into, well, now I want to adopt these AI tools and technologies. How do I do that safely? How do I help my developers do that safely? If I'm a security engineer, how do I ensure that we're not, giving away the keys to the kingdom and inviting malicious actors and threats into the system? And so we're now talking about Chainguard hardened agents. We're talking about extending the Chainguard factory, the same things we use AI to build, making that available to our customers.
Yeah, no, that's a lot there to take in. I think that I'm going to use the keynote's words saying you're making security invisible to the developer, which is incredibly powerful and important, especially when you start looking at what does the term developer actually mean. You're looking at citizen developers or professional developers, right?
Sure.
And when we start using these applications, the thing that comes into my mind, and the market has been echoing this a lot, is governance, compliance, and regulation, right? When you think of things like the new EU CRA that's going into effect, by September 2026, reporting has to be in place, and by December 2027, all applications have to comply, otherwise you have steep penalties.
Indeed.
This is an area there, I think the hardening images really comes across as a security factor, that know, like, and trust something that you can deliver. Would you agree with that, or is that kind of the area you're going after?
Yeah, I think it starts with, your opening volley, which is, man, the definition of a developer has dramatically expanded. Once upon a time, a developer was a person who could sit down and write code of some kind. And, you can go all the way up from machine code and assembly code to low-level C and C++ to Java to high-level interpreted languages. But still, the classical developer was someone with or without a computer science degree who would open up an editor of some kind, type some code out, and then try to get it to run. And great developers were able to do that, quickly. They were able to do it efficiently. They were able to do it in ways that prevented problems later. But now we're seeing where developer means someone who can describe the state of a system that they want to exist in a prompt to an AI, and the AI does the code writing aspects of it. But that developer, I would still say that an important part of the developer definition is they have to be able to judge whether or not that's good and that's right.
Absolutely.
And so those are the pieces that many of the announcements we made today is how Chainguard's helping that broadened definition of a developer succeed in a space where the tools are so much more powerful than they've ever been before.
And to that point, you're also really changing the skill set of what a good developer does and needs to do in their day-to-day.
Yeah, insightful, very insightful. So what a developer actually has to do, describe the state of a system that they want to exist, churn, evaluate the results, and know whether those results are good or bad, and then go back into the prompt. A huge piece of this has been the reconciliation. That's what we call that loop that happens inside of that churn piece that continuously looks at the output of the system and puts it back to the AI and the agent to redevelop it and fix it again. There's still humans in the loop, and I think there's going to be humans in almost every loop for a very long time. But the amount of work that's able to be done inside of that agentic process, it's incredible, Rebecca.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of the new products, services, and features that have been announced today. I want to start with Chainguard OS packages.
Yes.
You already mentioned them a little bit, but talk a little bit.
Yeah, I love this one. It's foundational. It's atomic. It's in some ways more empowering to our customers who really want to build using their own tools, but start from the most secure base possible. We've opened that up. So any customer of ours who is already a Chainguard catalog customer, meaning they had purchased access to the entire image catalog, automatically has access to Chainguard OS packages. Customers who want access to Chainguard OS packages simply become a catalog customer. So they go hand in hand. Now, our catalog customers get access to over 2,000 and growing hardened container images that we've built, we've procured, we continue to test and quality assure and remediate the CVEs in. But we've had customers who wanted to build their new and interesting images in new and interesting combinations of our packages. And so now we've made that available. Customers can take Chainguard APK packages, still covered by our SLAs to remediate CVs and security vulnerabilities in those packages, and then they can assemble them using whatever tool they want, not necessarily getting the hardened container image from Chainguard. Or I guess in addition to getting the hardened container images from Chainguard, they can assemble their own images to however they like using our packages. So that's our Chainguard OS packages. It's the most fundamental atomic unit, high quality operating system packages provided, fresh, free of CVEs, and quality assured.
And it's well adopted. The numbers you were showing at the keynote, the customer adoption was pretty substantial. From year over year.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the catalog growth is there as well. You mentioned, speaking of the catalog growth, the innovation provided by the hardening charts and also enhanced SBOMs. Those were kind of new features. But one of the things that was interesting to me was the self-service model. Because again, I kind of lean back to the previous comment of like the developer, right? They're doing their thing. Everything's being shifted left or shifted anywhere at this point. What does that mean? Like, Chainguard Catalog Starter as a new announcement, and that also has a focus with the self-service model. Is that a...
Yeah, so look, I'll put on my developer hat. I usually know what I want and I know where to get it from, and we've essentially adapted the Chainguard enterprise sales model to meet many developers where they are. They just want access. So there's some number of free images that any developer can get access to now at this point. What we found is that often those individual developers bring Chainguard into an organization. They already fall in love with it, and then it spreads quite virally in a good way that solves security issues for other teams. So we've expanded that tremendously, I think, through the developer program.
Yep.
Self-service just means developers can go directly to Chainguard, get the images they want, start building immediately without having, a trial period and a sales executive involved.
So this philosophy that you're describing, where developers own the recipes, but Chainguard owns the ingredients, is this clean mental model. But what do you do when those worlds collide? When a developer wants to use a package that doesn't meet your security standards, for example, what's the ethos there?
Yeah, so we have processes by which we add packages to the catalog. We add dozens of packages to the catalog every single day, a couple of images every day or every other day. That's roughly the pace. We have an intake process by which any customer can request new unpackaged software to become packaged, new images to become created by us. And we run it through a series of quality gates to ensure that the software is well maintained, that it's free of malware or can be made free of malware and CVEs. And then we put it into basically the automation where our factory will continuously rebuild and rebuild that software, detect new releases and build that. Occasionally we encounter something that doesn't meet our standards. We'll usually inform the customer why. It's not a thoughtless decision. It's very thoughtful. Here's reasons why we're not going to take that software on. And it's rare, but when we encounter that, we're usually a trusted advisor to our customer that, hey, this isn't good software that we're going to, broadly depend on. We'll often also advise them on alternatives to that. Now, if they want to continue building that for, other reasons, they certainly can, and they can add that to their images, using the mechanisms that I just described. But, we'll take a position occasionally on something that, we don't believe belongs in our, enterprise catalog. It's very exceptional, though.
Okay. I mean, and it also I would imagine, builds credibility and trust too with your customers as that advisory role.
Especially when we can offer, here's a well-maintained alternative. Here's a fork of that, dead project that someone else is maintaining. Occasionally, we take on the maintenance of that. We have this process called Emeritus to build on Emeritus and then open source software at the end, where Chainguard is taking on the maintenance of some extremely well-used, high-quality software that was simply abandoned by the maintainers.
Yeah, so let's double-click on that. I like the trust point that you were kind of talking about, Rebecca, but I also want to kind of get into open source a little bit more because there's, obviously the ecosystem of using open source technologies and the technology stacks is important to a lot of developers. It's actually critical to most developers and how they develop their applications. The Chainguard approach of making sure that works within their environment, you put some I'll call it belts and suspenders in place to make sure that things actually work the way they're designed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the belt and suspenders is, definitely, we go heavy on the quality assurance. I think that's very important. Customers come to us saying, hey, we love this idea of a rolling release or a distroless approach, but how do we know that it's going to work? And so I'll usually explain to them the entire process by which we detect upstream releases. We download that source code. We check the checksums, ensure that those match. We apply the build rules. We build, configure, make, install, or whatever the build process is. We'll run any upstream tests that are available for that project. We've also enhanced every single package, every one of our 7,000 plus packages. 100% of them have Chainguard developed proprietary tests that we run on top of that and ensure that every subsequent release can meet those quality gates. If anything fails, then it goes into a queue where humans then review. And then we then calculate build dependencies and runtime dependencies of those. We'll retest there. Then we assimilate those into images, run integration tests across those images, and then we'll put them into Helm charts and federate multiple services together and run yet another set of tests. So that's your belt and suspenders, Paul. I mean, it's multiple levels of quality assurance gates. If anything fails, and I mean anything fails, any one of the dozens and dozens of checks, it ends up in a queue where a human analyzes what went wrong, figures out how to solve that, and then retrains our model so that we never encounter that problem again.
Built for scalability.
Totally. With the flywheel, where this factory continues to get better every time it runs.
You are architecting for a future that is still taking shape. How do you think about that when you're engineering systems today where AI is autonomously writing code and generating and maintaining the code. How do you think about that? And how do you work with customers to help them approach?
You're more right than you realize, Rebecca. About this time last year, me and my engineering team celebrated the release of our Chainguard Factory, and we didn't call it 1.0 at the time. We just called it the Factory. We had this entire initiative called Finish the Factory, and we finished it. And then guess what? We had to rebuild it over again. And now I think we realize, like Dan today was talking about the Chainguard Factory 2.0. We created the 2.0. We had to go back and call the previous one the 1.0. And it turns out 2.0 isn't the finishing point either. This thing is going to continue evolving. So yes, we're absolutely shaping the future. I would say in, the humblest way possible, that we certainly were proud of what we've done and we feel like we're ahead of the curve. But we're also ready, willing, and able to share all of those advances with our customers as much as possible. And, to that end, we've extended much of the Chainguard Factory itself to our customers. They can leverage much of the AI and agentic approaches, our driftless agentic framework, the reconcilers that we use to just make that software better over time. Our customers can take advantage of that directly. They can leverage an app that we built for GitHub. They can install that GitHub app into their repository, and then that GitHub app can detect all the places where those customers and developers are using software that could come from Chainguard that doesn't at this point. So it'll look at Docker files and determine what is the source of those images and say, hey, there's actually a Chainguard image here. It could also say, there isn't a Chainguard image, but there could be. Would you like to open up a request for an image here? It'll detect places where developers are installing third-party software off the internet. This is the pip install, the Maven add, and the npm install that's just coming from somewhere off the internet. It will determine that, hey, these artifacts could come from Chainguard. And by the way, we're not just going to complain at you and tell you all of these things. We're actually going to send you a PR, a pull request that says, here are the changes that you would hypothetically need to make to your Docker files, to your build processes, to your code to take advantage of, the Chainguard approach. And then it will write tests even to determine whether the previous version of this matches the successive version once it's rebuilt with Chainguard, and then ensure that those match. It's still ultimately up to those customers, their humans, their developers, their architects to review the results and approve that pull request or make modifications to that pull request. So that's the future that it is under development, Rebecca, but man, it is here as well.
It is. The future is bright. Well, Dustin Kirkland, thank you so much for coming on the show. Great conversation.
So much. Yes, absolutely.
I'm Rebecca Knight for Paul Nashawaty. Stay tuned for more of theCUBE's coverage of Chainguard Assemble. You're watching theCUBE, the leader in enterprise tech news and analysis.